The very first practical way we can start turning our stress into strength is through the sugar connection. So I think this is so interesting. Look at the lady, looks like she's from the 50s, 1950s. Stressed is desserts spelled backwards. And that's so interestingly true because the adrenal glands and the liver and the pancreas all play a role in managing our blood sugar levels. So when we have our adrenals overstimulated, adrenals again are those little small glands that sit on top of our kidneys that are our stress response, and they are part of the whole cascade of hormone imbalances too. So our sex hormones, some of our steroid hormones, all of those pieces are regulated by the adrenal glands. Our adrenaline in fight or flight mode and the cortisol to anti-inflame can become inflammatory if it stays high too long. But the piece that the adrenals do that help with the stress response is flooding the blood and the organs, and primarily all these stress response, they need elevated sugars to be able to match whatever acute stressors are happening. But what happens is, instead of only handling acute stressors, the adrenals are handling chronic stressors as well, and we have elevated insulin because we have elevated blood sugar from a stress response that's overstimulated. So all of that elevated insulin, overstimulated adrenals equal high cortisol levels. When cortisol levels are high chronically, it becomes a very inflammatory state. It blocks another hormone called DHEA and causes elevated blood sugar. So when our blood sugar gets dysregulated, the adrenals have to step in and fire. That's when we get, over time, this chronic stress and sugar connection. So when we maintain a balanced blood sugar, this already starts to be able to decrease our body's stress response and lower the cortisol, lower the insulin, and it prevents the weight gain and the hormone imbalances that ensue from stress. So a lot of times we use sugar to medicate, self-medicate our stress response, and that's really even just feeding this whole cycle of sugar and stress. So you see here the adrenal glands and the cortisol, that third box, and the highlighted part of the cortisol's role is to regulate blood sugar. But when it's overstimulated and it has to fire in order to pull sugar into the blood as part of a stress response and raise that blood sugar level, allowing us to start to tap into the energy piece of the sugars, that's where the chronic stress response becomes negative. And we have all these other hormones that you see in this chart affected. And eventually, you saw in that chart of the phases of dysregulation, stress dysregulation, cortisol dysregulation, finally that cortisol remains high so long that it just bottoms out, and what we call, or has been called historically, adrenal fatigue. It's not exactly the right accurate description of it, but the cortisol finally we can't absorb any more into cells. It's just chronically high, kind of like insulin resistance. We have cortisol resistance, and the positive effects of cortisol that we're supposed to be having are lost because of the imbalance of it. And then we get nervous system, dysfunction, even some mental, emotional pieces play, and it's all interrelated. And a big piece of that stems from just simply not having our blood sugar regulated. And in our Western thought and culture on health, until we have a coded state of diabetes, we've been somewhat duped into thinking from our Western approach to healthcare, it's really illness care, is that until it gets to that stated diagnosis code of diabetes, there's nothing to do, and there's nothing we can do about it. And really, there's so many phases and stages that we go through of hypoglycemia to hyperglycemia to metabolic resistance and insulin resistance. We can do so much before we even come to the state of diabetes. And there's a lot of people, their pancreas is functioning really well. Genetically, they have a strong pancreatic function. And so the same sugar dysregulation that causes one person to actually have a coded diabetic condition may affect another person in more of this nervous system side of things, or more of heart health, or more mental, anxiety, depression side versus the actual diabetes. But it's the same root of blood sugar regulation. And it doesn't have to be diabetes to have an actual issue with blood sugar regulation that causes health problems. Here's a really great infographic from Dr. Jockers here that I really want to highlight the difference in the acute versus chronic and our body's stress response. And it always starts with the hypothalamus, that HPA axis starts with this hypothalamus gland, the control center. It's kind of like the conductor of the orchestra. And in the short term, more of that acute response, it sends a signal to the spinal cord. And that nerve signals the adrenal medulla. The adrenal medulla is a piece of the adrenal glands that secretes adrenaline and noradrenaline, and it leads to this, rising that blood sugar like we talked about, higher blood pressure, faster breathing, faster. We need all of that. It slows digestion down because there's so many more important things going on than digesting food right now. So the fight or flight sympathetic mode, it helps us get out of situations, helps us respond well when we're maybe under attack or there's some acute stressor that's going on. But what happens is when that long-term stress response, that chronic side of stress, the same thing. The hypothalamus is stimulated, it releases this ACTH to the anterior pituitary gland, so the hypothalamus pituitary gland communicate. That sends that ACTH to the adrenal cortex instead of the medulla, and it secretes cortisol or aldosterone. So cortisol and aldosterone, those hormones lead to higher blood volume, higher blood pressure, processing of proteins and fats to glucose. So it still is elevating the blood sugar levels. It gives a suppression to our immune system. So instead of fighting off our own invaders, it suppresses that ability. So that's why people get sick every fall, every winter, the same time. They're still dealing with some kind of chronic chest cough. Chances are their adrenals are very fatigued. So lower production of sexual hormones, the estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, sometimes those get bottomed out. It starts with this adrenal cascade, and then eventually we have kidney issues. So when we're dealing with chronic stressors, this whole cascade of this HPA, stress response, a little different path than over here in the acute. But this is what we're talking about that leads to this exhaustion phase eventually. And a lot of times it has to do with this dual purpose of managing blood sugar and dysregulated blood sugar, the adrenals having to step in. It's like the sugar is a stressor. And it adds to that, and it suppresses our immune system, and it floods our body with glucose, and it prohibits cardiovascular health, and there's so many pieces that sugar can be tied to. Regulate what the impacts are can also help in how to fix. So getting into the practical side of it, high stress and high cortisol, it disrupts our natural circadian rhythm. Maybe you've experienced that. When you're under stress, for some reason, I'm not sleeping that great. It affects how quality of sleep, quantity of sleep. It disrupts that circadian rhythm because melatonin is also a hormone produced in some glands, and it talks to cortisol, and that melatonin cortisol dance we talked about in rest module. It can definitely alter the sleep. So we're not getting the right sleep, so we're tired, we're functional, we're not making good decisions, we start gaining weight, especially around the midsection. So when stress is involved in weight gain, we see a lot of that right in that midsection, right over our vital organs, and that visceral fat starts to accumulate, and that's going to be the detrimental type of fat to our health. It leads to adrenal dysfunction, inhibits thyroid. Down the chain in this cascade, it's the hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenals, and the adrenals affect the thyroid. A lot of times people, jump to thyroid and want to support the thyroid or medicate even the thyroid or replace the thyroid altogether because it seems like it's a thyroid issue, and really the thyroid's downstream. That impact is downstream from the adrenals, from the hypothalamus, from the pituitary, from even sugar regulation. So if we never address the blood sugar dysregulation and we only address thyroid, we're missing it. And this can lead to many other hormone imbalances. And a lot of it happens kind of simultaneously in conjunction with each other. But without looking at the adrenal dysfunction, without looking at the dysregulation in blood sugar and the actual stress response cycle and how to modulate that, we're never going to get to the root cause. And eventually we're going to be in this cycle of just repeatedly never getting hormone balance back. So that's a sad state to be in, but we know what to address. We know some of the root pieces of this, and sugar regulation is one of them, and then adrenal support is another one, and then thyroid support can all lead to hormone balances of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone. All right. All right, let's get into the actual food addictions and the sugar craving management and the blood sugar practically. How does that look in real life? So, top 5 common food addictions. What foods do you feel like control you, or do you most regularly turn to alter your moods or alter your state of mind? And a lot of times they're sodas, regular or diet. A lot of times chocolate and other desserts like ice cream. A lot of times just junk munchies like french fries or potato chips, breads and pastas, and then caffeine of coffee and teas. So all of these are really just a self-medicating mechanism. Now, if you eat chocolate, a couple times a week or have a special occasion where you're celebrating an anniversary and you have pasta, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about true addictions where these foods control us and we really cannot function at the level we need to without them. That's what we're talking about with addiction. So how come these foods are the most addictive for us? Well, it all has to do with this cycle of triggers. What triggers these foods to be needed? These triggers lead to voids or highlight a void that's there. There's got to be a void in our life. There's got to be something missing that we're needing. And when we have a trigger and it highlights a void, then we have a craving to fill that void. Those cravings, when we listen to them continually and put them in our bodies or, satisfy a certain, let's say, sweet tooth, for instance, then it leads to addiction. And certain of these cravings literally are biochemically addictive. Sugar is one of the most addictive substances we can put in our bodies. Caffeine's another one. And a little bit in moderation of each of those are not a bad thing, but when it leads to an addiction to where we're dependent on that substance to function at a certain level, that's when we know it's controlling us. And that addiction can also become a trigger. And that trigger highlights the void, which highlights a craving, which fuels the addiction. It's this endless cycle. So how do we break that cycle? Well, there may be some there may be some psychological and some spiritual links to these, but really breaking that addiction cycle should start just with the physical. Very simple, with a physical component of breaking this cycle. Then we can look a little bit deeper. If you feel like you are the person that has to come home and have something sugary in the afternoon to pick you up, or after a stressful day at work, or after a meal every time, those food cravings telling you something. They're telling you that you need energy. And that energy, instead of it coming from really very simple sugars that convert to glucose quickly in the body, that elevate insulin, that stimulate cortisol in a negative way, we need to shift that. And instead of just saying no in the wheelhouse of willpower, we actually can turn that craving off. And when we do have those cravings, shift to another healthier alternative to answer what our bodies are telling us. So Food Craving Toolkit is in the resource library for people that are part of our coaching program, but amino acids are really the key to stopping the sugar cravings from a very short-term physical switch. We're talking about L-glutamine, we're talking about tyrosine, we're talking about 5-HTP, GABA, DLPA. These are all amino acids that I wouldn't just say go out and buy one if you feel like you're having a lot of sugar cravings. We need a little bit more comprehensive look, because there's some contraindications for tyrosine. Let's say, for example, there's a few contraindications for 5-HTP or a time that you really don't want to take those specific amino acids. And there may be really a case to be made to be combining a few amino acids. Taurine's even another good one. So you really want to know your root cause of why you're craving sugar. And we have a sugar craving questionnaire that has 8 different types that kind of puts people in a certain bucket, let's say, and then we can target which amino acids work well. Now, if you're wanting to go ahead and say, I have a lot of carb cravings, I have a lot of sugar, and sometimes I do okay, and I can say no, and other times I can't, and then I get real stressed, and I just go wild. If that's you, and you don't really feel like, okay, I don't want to figure out a specific amino acid protocol yet, then just buy a liquid multi-amino acid supplement. Liquid multi-amino acid just means there's a lot of different amino acids in there. You could even do BCAA, so branched chain amino acids. It's a powder. You can put it in water. That way you're not doing a therapeutic dose of any type of amino acid if you're not sure of contraindications for yourself. So amino acids can help stop sugar cravings in their tracks. But the key is really knowing what's the reason we even have sugar cravings? What's the root cause? And a lot of that could be just we don't have the neurotransmitters. We're depleted in serotonin, let's say. And all neurotransmitters are built from amino acids. That's one reason why amino acids can be so key to curbing these sugar cravings, because you're building these neurotransmitters that you should, and their levels are a little bit more optimal, so the sugar cravings, dissipate. Another reason, for instance, with L-glutamine is a key amino acid to help build our intestinal lining, small intestinal lining primarily. And when we do that, the gut imbalances start to be brought, as far as microbiomes, bacteria, parasitic, fungal yeast in the gut start to normalize. And when those, what we call negative or pathogenic or opportunistic type of microbes in the gut, the bad guys, when they are too prevalent, they feed on sugars. And so if we have an imbalance in our gut's calling for more and more sugar. It runs on those. And so when we have that gut imbalance, or it's linked, to our digestive health, our digestive system balance, then a lot of times those sugar cravings can get out of control. So when we rebalance our gut, then man, slowly but surely those sugar cravings go away. So L-glutamine helps to address that gut health related sugar craving, whereas like 5-HTP or GABA, those are precursors to neurotransmitters. 5-HTP precursor to serotonin. GABA acts as an amino acid and a neurotransmitter, has a dual role. Those help really in the neurotransmitter department. Tyrosine helps in the thyroid area, so sometimes low thyroid can increase sugar cravings. So the amino acids, from a broad spectrum, they really address the root causal functional piece of why we're craving sugar in the first place. So what do we do in the meantime? We can take some amino acids, that's number 4 here. How do we conquer sugar cravings? We can also increase our natural fats and fibers at meals. So instead of eating carbs and fats together so much, we can start to separate those and increase our natural fats. So when we're working with clients, we really encourage people to put a lot of their carbs in the middle of the day. So we're talking about complex carbs here: fruits, vegetables, grains, beans. Those complex, really high fiber carbohydrate foods are really healthy. We need them. Instead of putting them in the morning and at night, let's put them mostly in the middle of the day and separate them. And then we also want to increase that natural fat. So we're eating butters and ghees and coconut oil and olive oil and avocados and olives, really good natural fats. Eating more of those than we are of carbohydrates, let's say at one meal or 2 meals, and then increasing carbohydrates in another meal. So increasing natural fats, that helps you stay satiated. Increasing fibers helps you stay satiated. And then the fibers also feed the good bacteria in the gut. So our good bacteria can kind of quiet the bad bacteria for calling for sugar. We want to eat and take probiotics consistently so that good balance of bacteria in our gut really can rule and win over the bad bacteria. And so that cravings can start turning off. And then we pick on a healthy sweet exchange. So for a lot of people, they say, I'll just eat fruit as a healthy sweet exchange. And sometimes that can be okay, but people start just replacing something like ice cream with a smoothie. And sometimes those smoothies can be just as sugar laden when they're all fruit juice and they're bananas and orange juice, and it's super high sugar. So healthy fruit exchange doesn't necessarily mean fruit. It means a whole lot lower on the glycemic index, meaning it converts to sugar so much slower than something else. So banana converts to sugar really quick. Mango converts to sugar really quick versus berries, strawberries, raspberries, blueberries convert to sugar really slowly. So you want to have healthy sweet exchange, meaning maybe some raw honey, maybe some sucanat, sugarcane natural as a sweetener, maybe some stevia as a sweetener, and using some lower glycemic fruits instead, and making some really healthy, like mock frozen yogurt. We have several recipes, and fat bombs that have some chocolate and some nuts, and it's just a slower conversion. So instead of reaching for a Snickers bar, you can reach for something else. Amino acids we've talked about, and then 5, hydration. Sometimes we're not hungry or we're not craving sugar, we're actually thirsty. So always, if you're having a kind of a heavy sugar craving come over you and you really need something sweet, commit to drinking 1 glass of water, at least 1 glass of water, maybe even get an amino acid powder and dissolve it in there, and see if that just 1 glass of water with a little bit of amino acids or 1 glass of water with a probiotic supplement really help to cure the sugar cravings, because maybe at the end of the day, you're not really hungry, you're thirsty. And then the final thing about sugar, and we talk about it a lot more in our specific protocols when we work with clients, but how do you balance blood sugar during the day just with food and the combination of macros, protein, carbs, and fats, and when you eat them on a good, predictable, what they call feeding schedule or meal schedule. That's going to be really key to keeping the sugar cravings, at a minimum. So if you eat something kind of sugary in the morning, like coffee and a donut or coffee and a bagel, it spikes blood sugar, and then you don't eat because you're under pressure a lot at work, meetings and everything, and then you don't eat again until 5 or 6 at night, you're going to be totally susceptible to really some main sugar cravings. They'll be hard to say no to, because your body's not really designed to go that long without food, without sustenance, without true nutrition. So balancing blood sugar and really curbing these cravings, these sugar and high carbohydrate cravings, is going to really be a key piece to managing stress. So talking about sugar balance and really lowering the body's stress response from a physical standpoint, let's hit some nutrition. So we're talking about a simple intermittent fasting routine can be super helpful for managing stress, for regulating blood sugar, and it's simply a consistent eating routine. And you think, man, that sounds like totally doable. And then life goes. And you're like, I've had 2 days of really good predictable eating, and then whoop, day 3, it went out the window. Day 4, I got back on it. So maintaining consistent eating times can be a little bit tricky depending on the stage of life you're in, depending on the factors that are involved in your day, but putting a little more intentional thought into when am I eating, what am I eating at each of those meals can make a huge difference. So intermittent fasting, while it can be more intense, but it doesn't have to be. It doesn't need to necessarily start there. It just needs to be a predictable, consistent eating routine. You eat breakfast within 30, 40 minutes every day at the same time. You eat lunch about the same time. You have a snack maybe and a dinner about the same. So your body and your hormones and your gastric juices and the enzyme, everything's triggered at the same time. It's very predictable, and it kind of optimizes function. A lot of times when people start intermittent fasting, they basically go into starvation mode, and that's not a healthy way to intermittent fast. And they're eating all over the clock, maybe inside that 8-hour window or whatever hour window they pick, but they're not eating predictably, they're not eating a good combination of macros, and so they throw their hands up, intermittent fasting didn't work for me. Well, chances are they didn't quite implement it exactly correctly. So consistent eating routine is really what we're shooting for. That manages blood pressure, blood sugars, adrenal, stress response a whole lot better. And then nutrients, we need clean proteins on a consistent basis to get those amino acids in. We store them, we kind of pool them, and we want to keep maintaining that pool of amino acids. B vitamins are huge in stress and nutrition. Magnesium and sea salt. Sea salt's fantastic for stress response. If you're craving salt, that's probably because your adrenals are really going at it. And you want to minimize that stress response by the adrenals. So sea salt, that has color to it, is super important. The mineral magnesium is a relaxing mineral. The B vitamins help us cope with stress and really support the adrenal function and clean proteins. Supplements, we've looked at and when we work with our clients, we come up with a very targeted, personalized plan. Adaptogen herbs are fantastic. So they're herbs that God created that can have the capacity to upregulate a gland that's functioning low or downregulate a gland that's functioning high or hyper. So we have hypo function or low function and hyper function, overstressed. And over time, all these glands can go through these phases of being in a hypo mode or a hyper mode. And so adaptogens are really great as far as a supplement of herbs that can meet the gland where it's at and help balance it. So if someone doesn't really want to pay, or they're not interested in or ready to, for a variety of reasons, doing any testing, blood testing, saliva testing, any testing of actual hormone levels, especially cortisol or adrenal hormones, and they just want to get some help but without really wanting to go through the testing side of it, adaptogens are the way to go, because we don't know exactly where the levels are, and they meet those glands where they are. Glandulars are the actual gland, maybe from a bovine source or a porcine source, or they give the body the actual glandular support. So that's more for someone who's in that hypo, low functioning state, and they know that we really need to really help support the body's own function. Ashwagandha is an herb. It's awesome for adrenal function, but not everybody responds well to ashwagandha. Natural Calm is a magnesium supplement that can help support adrenal function, especially if someone's having trouble getting to sleep at night. It's a version of magnesium. It's a form of magnesium. You can dissolve it in water, and it helps people get to sleep a little bit quicker. It's just another way to get magnesium in. And then Phosphatidyl Serene or Cortisol Manager, both of those are a combination of nutrients that really help manage cortisol production levels and balance that out. So this is not by any means an exhaustive list, but it gives you an idea. There's so many tools we have at our fingertips that we can do, that we can control. And sometimes stress is a feeling of not being able to control things in life. Here's some things you can. And build a good, consistent eating routine. Get those good, clean nutrients in with vitamins and minerals. And then go ahead and supplement and support your body's own function. Those three pieces can really make a big difference before any major disease states come in on the picture. And even after, not all hope is lost. We can pull back up out of those disease states and reverse many of them just by supporting our body's own tools it needs to heal. Hey, so a really quick look at supplements for stress management. We're talking about adaptogens. Biotics has a great one that's AGHS. You can get it at Sprouts. You can get online. You can get through your coach if you're working with someone here at Eureka Holistic or a partner clinic. Stress management supplements, a regulator. You want the adaptogen. If you need a support, you know you're low and you know your adrenals are very fatigued, then you need a glandular. We also recommend highly the Biotics ADB5 Plus, which is a glandular plus B vitamins. It's a great one for supporting your own body's gland function. Then maybe you need a balancer, just something that keeps things in more of this stimulation and relaxing both state. And then you're looking at more of a formula for cortisol manager, cortisol stress, Natural Calm, or that Phosphatidyl Serene. So that helps you kind of maybe put into perspective which type of supplement you need, and then the coach can actually really give you more of a personalized plan for adrenal support and stress management from the physical side. So in summary, managing and mastering stress, turning stress into strength, really does have a huge piece in our body's own response physically or metabolically. What things are triggered, what things are metabolized, what's broken down, what hormones messages are being shared, what's actually happening in the body. And here's the summary of what we just talked about in this lesson. Stabilizing blood sugar is key to managing stress from a physical standpoint. Adrenal support, those glands that really are stress response glands, if we're supporting those, it helps us increase our capacity to manage stress. And number 3, healthy comfort food exchange. Food's supposed to be pleasurable. Food can give comfort, but it doesn't need to negatively impact our health. So finding things that are healthy that we really do love as a healthy comfort alternative could be huge. And then staying active. Exercise is such a great stress reliever from a physical standpoint. It literally triggers mitochondrial function. It lowers blood sugar. There's so many positive impacts of just staying active, like we talked about in Module 3 on exercise. And number 5, getting to sleep on time, getting that cortisol melatonin cycle back into normal circadian rhythms, giving our body enough rest and downtime, mentally, emotionally, all those 7 types of rest we talked about in Module 2 on rest. So sleep, all these things play together, and all of it helps to lower the stress burden on our bodies and really downregulate some of the major health issues that we could be preventing. And these are all pieces we can control, and we can choose to really build our own stress response and strengthen that resilience.